to see your doctor.
Yeah, one of the things you did as a researcher was you actually attended a church, the Victorious Faith Center in North Carolina, and there you encountered people who were heavily invested in the prosperity gospel, including the health elements, but some of them were healthcare workers themselves. And what kind of personal exchanges did you have with believers there on this topic?
Yeah, because people always assume, especially with Black churches in poor areas, that the only reason they're praying for faith healing is because they don't have access. Is Jesus is, the thought is Jesus is the only doctor they're going to see. And then they had access to some of the best healthcare in the world. And so it was always, it was very interesting for me to talk with them about. Some of them were anti-immunization. Others would accept medical intervention to the point where they felt like, no, I'm just going to pray about it. Others would accept partial surgeries or whole surgeries. I mean, they were quite discriminating, which, kind of going through my own health problems right now. I mean, there's a real wisdom actually in being discriminating in what you'll accept. And they, I think, have rightfully intuited that Black bodies don't always get the same care as white bodies, and that they need to be their own advocates and maybe even assume that they have solutions that doctors don't have. So I think there's kind of a both and to the nature of their relationship to the healthcare system.
Underneath it all, again, it's just idea of God will make you well if you have faith for that, or God will make you wealthy if you have faith for that. And you brought us up to the present a little bit earlier in the discussion. And one thing we haven't touched on is sort of the fact that the prosperity movement has gone global. In fact, I guess you did talk about how people say it's an American movement, but you've seen it manifest itself globally in different contexts. And what does that look like briefly? Prosperity gospel sort of gone global.
Well, there's certainly hubs in which it's very popular. So Nigeria is both a tremendous source of prosperity preaching and a huge export. So the largest Protestant church in the Ukraine, for example, is run by a Nigerian pastor, Pastor Sunday. So there you'll see Nigerian preaching with Ukrainian folk dancing, and it is incredible.
Have you been there?
Oh no, just YouTube it. YouTube it. Yeah. Oh,
Wow.
how I'd love to go to Kiev right now.
Yeah.
But I've been to rural Texas to go to the annual conference for the Redeemed Nigerian Church of God. So, which is, it's Redeemed Christian something. Oh gosh, who knows? But it's Redeemed
long
Christian
names usually.
Church of God, I think. But it doesn't have the word Nigerian in it, but it is a Nigerian denomination.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most powerful exporters of missionaries globally, just like the Full Gospel Full Gospel Church in South Korea and Seoul used to be run by Paul Young-E Cho. It was reported at 1 million believers, largest church in the world, with a soft prosperity message. And they have sent out, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of missionaries globally. So you see hubs, you see a lot of crossing borders and adaptabilities to new cultures. You also see places that just confuse me. Like it did really well in Sweden in the 80s.
Huh.
And I had a talk with someone about that the other day, but the assumption is that these are places without robust systems that will support people if they get sick, or not one of the most egalitarian societies on earth. So I still haven't figured out most of the puzzle that is the international prosperity gospel's incredible diversity.
And I think this gets at one of the stereotypes that I had going into the book, which is the idea that the prosperity gospel offered big promises for little effort. But in reality, there's some manifestations of the prosperity gospel that can be very demanding on people.
Oh man, they worked harder. They were just the spiritually hardest working people in show business. I had never seen believers spend as much time preparing for Sunday spiritually as the folks I met. And I really came to admire that. Their sense that God is revealed in the details of their life, I thought was very, very inspiring. And it wasn't just that they wholesale accepted whatever the preacher said. It was that they were making their own judgments, whether publicly or privately, about what was best for them. And that wasn't nearly as stereotypical as you might expect.
I think it's easy for a lot of outsiders who don't align themselves with that movement to look at the few famous examples that we talked about, some of the scandalous things and some of the excesses of prosperity gospel preaching, and just dismiss it out of hand without really trying to understand who the people are that it's appealing to. And your introduction includes a caution that seems to try to get people to understand that they actually probably share some things in common with people who are drawn to the prosperity gospel.
Well, I think you're right that it appeals to universal claims that we all have these very fragile, very basic desires for our life. We want to be healthy. We want to have enough money. Many of us want kids, and if we have them, we just desperately want them to turn out okay, and for them to be healthy, and for them to have enough money. I mean, what seems like a simple life is a list of very long and very difficult to secure demands, no matter whether you live in America or Botswana. And so, it's easy for academics in particular, and me at that point, writing for my neo-Gothic spires of Duke, to be dismissive of people who are talking about money and looking for money. And then I go to my dramatically bedazzled church on Sunday, but it's bedazzled, in tasteful stained glass. And suddenly we are not talking about God's promises. We're talking about stewardship. And then suddenly I'm okay with other kinds of gods of wealth. So yeah, I find that people, they forget how very delicate we all are, how much we just need the basics. And the prosperity gospel is great at the basics. They understand that the baseline of what we need and want from God and from each other is so very obvious. And they make promises directly related to our deepest needs.
And so this book features your own personal voice and perspective, as we've talked about, I think more so than a lot of histories do today. Do you think that your direct experience with actual people, like these worshipers, these people you spent time on a bus with, or that gave you advice, or that spoke to you about their most personal beliefs, how did that impact your work as opposed to work of history where you're just dealing with records and people that are long gone?
Sure. I mean, and this is a problem for so many of us who crisscross now into other disciplines, doing sampling and sociology, and in particular ethnography, that we are written into our stories in ways that is so uncomfortable. And I tried to embrace how very uncomfortable it was by showing them what I wrote as much as I could for comment and for suggestion, not to make it nicer, though that's always a temptation, but we miss a lot. And especially we miss a lot when we think something's slightly absurd. And I find that like people, and you develop such a thick sense of irony sometimes, even when you're trying to understand people at a most fundamental level. So sometimes when I just didn't understand, it was the kind of point in which you get quiet and you write something down because you think, oh my gosh, this is research gold. That's actually the best point to ask another question, to say, so for me, I might interview with this lovely nurse and finding that she hops off the table at this moment in which the doctor says she should get her, I can't remember what it was, but appendix or something out, just a simple surgery. And she's like, nope, I'm going to pray about it. She hops off the table. And then I realized I just had a million other questions like, well, does it hurt now? And what do you do if it hurts now? And you're a nurse, so you have to diagnose people. Is that the same thing as negative confession? And what do you do about that? And she had answers for all of them that I would not have anticipated. And so just trying to step into the awkwardness of our subjectivity, I think I will make a pitch for that, giving us better data than if we pretend that we're not having our own reactions to what people are saying. So, I mean, we'd learn a lot from anthropologists, really.
That's Kate Bowler. She's assistant professor of American religion at Duke Divinity School. She's also the author of the book Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel. We'll take a brief break and come right back.
Believers and scientists have wrestled for centuries over the relationship between reason and faith, science and religion. Award-winning Latter-day Saint author and biologist Stephen Peck believes reason and faith are both indispensable tools we can use to understand God's creation. Evolving Faith, Wanderings of a Mormon Biologist is a collection of essays about Mormon theology, evolution, the environment, and other issues. Stephen Peck has the mind of a scientist, the soul of a believer, and the heart of a wanderer. In Evolving Faith, he provides welcome companionship for women and men engaged in the unceasing quest for further light and knowledge. Evolving Faith is part of the Living Faith book series from the Neal A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship. To learn more about this series, go to maxwellinstitute.byu.edu/livingfaith. Living Faith books are available at amazon.com.
It's the Maxwell Institute podcast. We're talking with Kate Bowler. She's a professor of American religion at Duke Divinity School. We're talking about her book, Blessed, which talks about the American prosperity gospel. So, Kate, I actually received your book, I think back when it came out a couple of years ago, but hadn't got to it until now. And I actually saw a piece that you'd recently written in the New York Times that prompted me to take another look at the book. And there's something in your book's introduction that took on new meaning when I read the New York Times piece. In your introduction to the book, you write, "It's a strange occupation to be a historian of divine well-being, as your own is getting away from you." What was going on health-wise at the time you were writing this book?
I had weirdly lost use of my arms. I was typing, and then all of a sudden they felt weird, and then they just went limp. And over the next year, I had just gotten my dream job. I just thought my life was finally kind of taking off. And then I spent the next year seeing over 100 doctors looking for a diagnosis. And that went from everything to people saying I was crazy, that I was making it up, to them trying to remove my top ribs. And that just led to a million theological jokes about rib removal. I took that one around the dance floor as much as I could. And to any number of sort of ill-advised arm surgeries that I contemplated or had. And so it was such a mystery, and the mystery was so frustrating. And in truth, it ended up being something super simple that eventually we could solve. I have overly lax joints, which when leading to too much instability leads to cutting off circulation, and then the lack of feeling. It's just that it's the kind that I have is a little bit rare. And so what ended up being, when I finally found treatment, I got better, within another 6 months. I just still have to maintain it. But at the time, it really seemed like, I would get locked in bathrooms that I couldn't get out of because my arms were too weak to turn the door handle. So I couldn't type anymore. I had to find new ways of taking notes. My entire academic life was done for a while because a whole semester of students that I was teaching had to get all their comments in emoticons. I was like, your paper makes me feel stamp happy. Because I had no use of my arms. And so trying to just keep your courage and your sense that something might turn out while you're navigating a complicated healthcare system, while you're daily interviewing people who probably think it's your own fault. So I was always at healing revivals with arm casts which always led to theological conclusions. And it was both a tough year, but it was also academically quite fruitful because I stepped into the message, the pain of loneliness, of feeling judged, but also just there are many, many ways of explaining pain to be really intellectually helpful, though it was emotionally often really tough. So that's probably why my healing chapter is a little more pangy than the other chapters. Maybe if I was desperately poor, it would have been the money chapter, but I was really sick.
So I'm really glad to hear that they got that situated. More recently, you published this kind of a follow-up.
But there's more. Wait.
Yes,
there's
but
more.
wait, yeah.
Exactly.
There's this piece in the New York Times. So I thought it would be best just to have you maybe read from the beginning of that article to give people an idea of where you're at now.
Sure. Let's see. On a Thursday morning a few months ago, I got a call from my doctor's assistant telling me that I have stage 4 cancer. The stomach cramps I was suffering from were not caused by a faulty gallbladder, but by a massive tumor. I'm 35. I did all the things you might expect of someone whose world has suddenly become very small. I sank to my knees and cried. I called my husband at our home nearby. I waited until he arrived so we could wrap our arms around each other and say the things that must be said. I have loved you forever. I am so grateful for our life together. Please take care of our son. Then he walked me from my office to the hospital to start what was left of my new life. But one of the first thoughts was also, oh God, this is ironic. I recently wrote a book called Blessed.
So where are you at now with that? Thank you, first of all, for reading that. I know this obviously is difficult to talk about, but it's something that you've been willing to talk about. Do you think your background and your research has helped you want to talk about this publicly?
I don't know. I still kind of go back and forth. Honestly, the only thing I really wanted to do was make an intervention into how people talk to sick people. Because all my time with the prosperity people taught me how much we all love our certainties. We all love our guarantees that our very delicate lives will all turn out. And as we know, as most of us know or have had glimpses of, life is really hard. I mean, even just in seasons, life is so hard. And so it was hard for me, though, to go from the, kind of dispassionate historian to the making a few normative claims about what I think is right and wrong, about the way that that movement addresses healing. In part, just with our training, we don't want to step in there, and it felt weird. But at the same time, I have to make more adjudicated decisions about how I spend my time, because I don't really know how much time I have. At first it's all still very dramatic, but at first they gave me very low survival rates for 5 years. And so I was looking at about 2 years, and that was just so intense. And now I'm in a clinical trial at Emory. I'm actually we're talking from Atlanta because I have to fly here every week for treatment. And so I'm grateful to have a new drug to try. And but this is my first time with everything. It's my first time being not just a historian. It was kind of nice to have history as a pure category before. It was like my mental vacation that I could go and just do my work. But now I'm a little bit professionally cancerous just because there's so much overlap between this world I lived in and just the reality of what I live in now. Like, I cannot go 10 feet without someone giving me advice about what to do and not to eat sugar, and have I tried this? And
what kind of religious ideas are people bringing to you, or that you picked up during your research? That
Man.
you're saying you're trying to also do an intervention here about the way people talk. So what kind of religious things do you encounter?
Oh man, because I didn't realize how much it was shared. So I've gotten 800 discrete emails from strangers telling me usually the worst things that have ever happened to them, their children dying of cancer, and the video they created of the things they wanted to say to their dying parent. So it's been a lot of that, but there's been a lot of, I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I'm a fundamentalist, I'm a prosperity person, just all kinds of the religious gamut. And a lot of them got the point, which was that it is very painful for people to pour certainty on your pain, especially in the midst of it. We have these very trite ways of explaining and reacting to pain in our culture that are not just facile, but they're just sort of obnoxious to people who are trying to just live it.
For example, give us some examples. Like what? Yeah.
For a reason, man. Everything always happens for a reason.
Everything happens for a reason, right?
And I got an email from someone the other day that said that he knew that, and he really, just so you know, everything does happen for a reason. And I figured that out when my cat died. I'm so happy for you. If that is a peak of cancer, I am happy for you. Or God is always opening doors and closing windows.
Yeah.
It's just totally his jam. A lot of it is attempts at health solutions. So, I joked about in the piece, but like a lot of, have you tried this kale? Nonstop kale. Man, the kale evangelists are out full force. A lot of, have you read this study about sugar? You shouldn't be eating that. People have all kinds of helpful suggestions for people in pain, and they love to give them. And my little sister, I think she said something so wise. She was just like, well, it is because, they love you. Yes. Well, not those strangers. They don't love me. But
right.
The people are frantic, and frequently, they just grab for whatever's there. And what's there is ideas about the power of the mind to overcome all things. I get a lot of that. There's no such thing as luck. You just need to try. You just need to try harder. I'm sure there's a way out of this. People are fine kind of with a sudden death, yes, very tragic, or sudden healing, but the ambiguity of staring down death, which I am required to do because at this point I still have inoperable tumors. So if this drug doesn't go well, I don't yet have other choices. So I live in this interim time in which every 60 days I get a scan that tells me if I get another 60 days. And that's how my life works. So it has a very short mental tether in which I am not able to enjoy certainty And that requires me to live in the present with my beautiful kid and my perfect husband and my lovely life that I am now more grateful for than ever before. So it's hard to move people away from these lovely conveniences, these joyful illusions that prop up our lives and help us feel sure. But I mean, the truth is, none of us know what's going to happen to us. So I just have to live in it in a more ridiculous way.
There's a sense in which we feel driven to tell someone what the story is. Like we need an explanation.
Yes. That's right. That's exactly right.
But we're like drawing them in to a story that's not their story.
Yes. Yeah.
I've felt, I've experienced loss in my own family, and there's a sense in which it's like you say, you for a lot of these people that come to you, you understand that there's a desire to care there, that there's this is not malicious.
Yes.
But it does not take away the pain that those types of approaches can bring to you. Now, the tricky part then is we still want to comfort people, or we want to be there for people. What kinds of advice would you give for someone who has a family member who's diagnosed with an illness like this, or that has a friend? What types of things are available? I mean, you're a Christian.
Yeah.
So what types of things do you suggest people consider?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm new to this, but the two things I think of a lot are I have the present, I have the beautiful now, the fact that it's gorgeous out. I get to talk to you. I get to do fun things in my job. I mean, what's happening right now? And then there's a kind of eschatological horizon of like the inbreaking of the kingdom, the beauty of God's vision of us, and the what will be. And if someone has questions for those things, you can be patient and loving and do your very best, or defer them to other stuff. But most people want you to live in the dead zone of the in-between, of the talking about outcomes and certainty and forcing you to retell the story and then respond to their anxiety about the story. And I think of it like the place between borders, right? Like no one's allowed to live there. It's a dead zone. And I find that there's just no life there for me. I cannot live there and just stay and live my life. And so if you can in any way not ask people to be professionally their disease by forever asking them to live in that dead zone, and mostly just realize that people don't want your certainties. Like they're struggling with their own. If they bring it up and they have their own stuff, then great. But mostly they just need loving presence and encouragement in the face of just a hug or really just praying for you. No one wants to hear, I know it's going to be okay, because guess what? You don't, and neither do I. And asking people to pretend for you is exhausting. So yeah, it's just living in the ambiguity and just being willing to walk alongside, I think is the most beautiful thing you can do for somebody.
It's Kate Bowler. Today we talked about her book, Blessed, A History of the American Prosperity Gospel. I really appreciate you taking your time to talk about this book and also to talk about your personal life as well.
Thanks. So glad to talk to you too.